So just when you thought the Warhammer universe couldn't get any more ridiculous, you start reading about the Imperial Knights. And these guys are very similar to the Knights of ancient Earth, but with one tiny little difference. Instead of riding horses into battle like we're used to, they've traded them in for some giant f***ing mechs instead. These things stand between 40 and 55 feet on average, and they're loaded up with some truly devastating firepower. And despite their absolutely ridiculous size, the Imperial Knights are actually incredibly nimble, as many of which are designed to fight in melee, taking something like a 30-foot long chainsword in addition to their guns. And I don't care who you think you are, but being in the path of a pissed-off, rampaging knight is not a place you want to be. In addition to all of that impressive weaponry, the knights are coated in literal metric tons of armor, not to mention a directional shielding system known as ion shields, which is a force shield the knight can rotate around its body to protect them from even the most devastating of ranged attacks. Now, it's pretty common to get the knights confused with their larger cousins, the titans, which are much bigger and far more powerful. There's also not as many of them, and they're nowhere near as nimble as a knight, but they fill different roles on the battlefield, and also have completely different histories and cultures. Not to mention a titan requires an entire crew to operate, whereas a knight is controlled only by a single pilot. A knight's pilot will have to undertake a ritual known as the Ritual of Becoming, where they'll end up having to bond with their war machine and wrestle its spirit into submission. If the ritual is successful, they'll be able to control the knight with their mind, the giant engine of death becoming an extension of their own body. Now, every one of these pilots is a member of a different knight household, of which there are hundreds with completely unique cultures. Now, the exception to this is what is known as a freeblade, which is a knight that has basically forsaken their household and is set off on their own across the stars. Now, this can happen for a variety of different reasons. Whether they be a pilot that for some reason has brought a great shame on their household, or they have a personal quest or vendetta that they have to solve on their own. Regardless of their status, the history of the knights is actually really cool. See, at one point humanity sent colony ships out in every direction to find new planets to conquer. A lot of these ships were basically on a one-way trip, so they would have to be completely self-reliant. To board these ships were the Imperial Knights, which would not only be used for protecting the colonizers, but also were designed for physical labor. Swords were used for clearing forests, and a lot of their guns were useful for mining. Now, the colonizers that controlled the knights would inevitably become the ruling class of these worlds, and the system of government that they set up was basically like a neo-feudalism. And it's fair to say that they were definitely a little pompous. They took their role as protectors of humanity very seriously. Over thousands of years, these households would gain enormous amounts of respect from the people they ruled over. And when it came to reuniting all of mankind after the Age of Strife, the Emperor saw great potential in these night worlds, and he tasked the Adeptus Mechanicus with folding them back into the Imperium. And even now, thousands of years later, the Knights and the Mechanicum are intrinsically linked. The Knight households are fiercely noble and dedicate themselves to the art of war above all else. Because outside of battle, the royal courts have to deal with a lot of politics. And after you've gotten used to piloting a 40-foot tall war engine, politics and governing just doesn't really have the same appeal anymore.